conclude by saying it's been a pleasure, as I said earlier, to work with you and with members of your team on your side of the aisle, and also work with our side over these years. It's a difficult issue, this budget of the United States, because we are charged with the responsibility of having a fiscally responsible nation, and in the past we have not been, and into the future it doesn't look like we're going to be. I do not at all or in any way underestimate your commitment or not respect your immense commitment to doing something about the debt which is saddling this nation and which will unfortunately strangle this nation if we don't do something about it. You were the one who came up with the term, the debt is a threat, and it still is, and it's a very accurate summation of the problem. On this budget, however, I have to say that I find it lacking, unfortunately. I wish it were more aggressive on the issue of the debt, especially the out-year debt. It is, for lack of a better word, a budget that kicks the can down the road. More spending, more deficits, more debt, less prosperity inevitably for our children as a result of that. And why do I say that? Well, as much as you've put it in the context of being a budget which brings the deficit down in relationship to GDP and does better than the President requests in relationship to GDP on deficits and on percent of deficit as a part of GDP, it really doesn't do a whole lot. If you back out the AMT language and you back out the estate tax language, what you're left with really is a $4 billion cut in foreign operations and an adjustment to the Pell Grant situation, which affects discretionary versus mandatory. Other than that, there's no significant difference that I can find. And of course, we've all seen what happens with AMT, and I suspect we'll see what happens with estate tax, that when you get past the 2 years, you're simply not going to find it's paid for, and therefore these numbers will not close as a result of that action in the way that you're hoping that they will. Spending remains, as you mentioned, very, very high, historically high, 22% of GDP. Under your numbers, I suspect it'll be higher because of the influence of the health care bills and emergencies, yes, and emergencies, which is not, we're not going to get our revenues up to that level, so we know we're going to have this deficit. And it's a structural problem which we really need to address. I'm concerned about a lot of elements of this in specifics. For example, the whole pay-go issue. The only remaining mechanism we have is budgetary pay-go vis-a-vis the AMT and the doctor's fix. And now that's going to be eliminated under this bill. So we're going to track the statutory language, and the statutory language was specifically structured so that AMT and the doctor's fix are not addressed. And so there's no pay-go requirements on those outside of the 2 years in the AMT, and for the whole 5 years for the doctor's fix. As I mentioned, the discretionary cut in here is simply a $4 billion cut relative to foreign operations next year. There is an adjustment, and I respect the way you did it, relative to Pell Grants. As we know, Pell Grants were moved into the mandatory accounts, $5 billion. They shouldn't have been. They should have stayed on the discretionary side, but at least you don't give the Appropriations Committee credit for that, so you reduce the appropriated accounts by that, but you still have a $5 billion expenditure on the mandatory side. So I don't think that can be scored as a reduction. The real issue here, when we get down to the bottom lines, is this. We are on an unsustainable path. This year, our percent of interest payments as a part of income will be 10%. 2014, it will be about, it'll get up to probably about 20%, 15%, somewhere in that range. 2020, it'll definitely be at 20%. Those numbers mean that our debt will be downgraded. We are on a course to have a junk bond government. And this budget doesn't do anything to significantly adjust that. You can't run a deficit at these levels and expect that you aren't going to end up with the world looking at our debt and saying they can't pay it back, or if they're going to pay it back, they're going to have to pay a huge premium. And the assumption of this budget is that we're going to maintain an interest rate level which is fairly favorable to us right now. It's favorable to us because of the world economy is flat, recession is worldwide, and therefore we're able to sell debt at a fairly cheap price. That's not going to continue. Our debt price is going to go up, and the assumption here that it won't is, I think, flawed, and it means that the numbers go up significantly as a result of that. We know where the money is that's causing this. It's primarily on the entitlement accounts. Regrettably, and this may be old ground, but it needs to be mentioned again, regrettably, when the health care bill was passed, it took trillions of dollars that should have been used to stabilize our debt situation and the Medicare situation and move them over to create a new entitlement. And that shouldn't have happened. And it's going to aggravate dramatically our capacity to address this as we move forward, either through the Fiscal Commission or if we do it in regular order, because it will be hard to find the funds to straighten this out. This bill, of course, doesn't address Social Security because we can't as a committee, but that is the other major entitlement account that needs to be addressed. Remember, both Social Security and Medicare go into negative cash flow in the term of this budget. For the last 20 years, we've used the Social Security funds and the Medicare funds to fund the general operation of the government rather than borrowing from the public. Can't do that again. Can't do it this year on Social Security, won't be able to do it next year on Medicare, won't be able to do it over the 5-year period on a net basis. So we're going to have to actually borrow now to fund Social Security payments. We're going to have to borrow to pay for Medicare. And we're going to have to borrow to pay for the general operation of the government. And that's why our debt is at such risk, and that's why this nation is on an unsustainable path. And regrettably, this budget does not address any of those issues in a substantive way. On our side of the aisle, we're going to offer a series of amendments which will try to correct that. And I'm sure they'll be roundly received with enthusiasm and energy. Things like Senator Sessions, who's much more aggressive on the freeze than this budget is. Proposals on how we protect the Medicare accounts. Proposals on how we affect a more aggressive way of disciplining ourselves on emergency spending. A whole series of proposals in this area. We will also have, if we have time, we'll offer it here. If we're not on the floor, a reconciliation instruction that's real. The reconciliation instruction in this bill is dangerous. Now, I know it's not the Chairman's intention, and he's made it very clear to me that he'll protect this reconciliation instruction if he can, but you got to remember, this is a $2 billion reconciliation instruction. We did a $2 billion reconciliation instruction last year, and we used it, we didn't use it, but Congress used it to spend $2.6 trillion. $2.6 trillion was spent on the auspices of a $2 billion reconciliation instruction. I don't know what the $2 billion reconciliation instruction means. To me, regrettably, it means that opportunity has been put on the table again to dramatically increase the size of government using the reconciliation vehicle to accomplish it. The Chairman has represented to me that that will not occur, at least in the area of cap and trade. That would be the one that would be most logical when you look at the scenario in front of us. But there are other places where I worry. If we're going to do a reconciliation instruction, we ought to do a robust reconciliation instruction, and it ought to have the protection which we as a committee passed and was accepted by the Senate 2 years ago, which is that any reconciliation instruction should have no more than 20% of the instruction spent on new program, so that 80% of any reconciliation instruction has to go to debt reduction. And obviously we will offer that amendment from our side again, because I think it's the only way to protect from the type of an event that happened last year, which so exploded the size of the government. So I am concerned about the reconciliation instruction as much as I give confidence to the Chairman's and understand the Chairman's intention is not to use it in that way. But there are others, other committees that will be doing the reconciling. I do want to respect and acknowledge that the language on how the Fiscal Commission reports is good language, that the Pell language, as I said, is the right way to handle the Pell language, that the war costs are accounted for, which is very appropriate and are built into the budget, and that the unemployment extension, should it occur, is also accounted for. That's good budgeting. So we have very serious reservations, and they just come down to the bottom line. Do we have the chart there? I mean, the bottom line is pretty simple. Can we put up the chart?
Yeah.
There. This is it. You know, this is off the President's budget, but as I said, the differences are simply the issue of how you score AMT and estate tax in the the third through the fifth years. The gap is there. We do not close it. It continues to expand. And what's most disturbing about this gap is that we're looking at a projected revenue which exceeds the historic base of our revenue as a nation, up to almost 20% of GDP, and still the gap grows. And so it is not a revenue issue in a historical context. It is a spending issue. And until we're willing to step up on the spending side of the ledger, we're absolutely guaranteeing that we're passing on to our kids a nation which will be less prosperous and where their standard of living will be less than ours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for your